Hello friends, my name is Dr. Robert. This is the first introductory session on the Beatles lyrics. Its topic is the Beatles' secret code. I have a PhD in history from Australia's largest university, Monash University, and its topic is the Beatles' lyrics. For most of you, it will come as a surprise last month as I record this video, when Paul McCartney released his new album, a very fine album, called The Boys of Dungeon Lane. The surprise was to find him saying that they wrote a secret code. And you might ask, how is it even possible for people as famous as the Beatles to have written a secret code? Well, it is possible, and today's session we'll talk about that claim Paul made. We'll talk about another song from the same album where he kind of invites us to discover the secret code, and a song from 40 years earlier where he describes the secret code in a little more detail. It's the first of 3 introductory sessions, after which there'll be around 300 sessions in which we progressively work through the Beatles lyrics and analytically. It's a private conversation in the public domain. It's an important conversation though. Paul, as we will see in the third song we look at today, says that if you don't know the Beatles' secret code, you really know nothing about the Beatles. You may know every arcane fact, but actually you don't know the real story. In my view, the story is secret but not necessarily bad. There are stuff they have simply chosen not to disclose, including the basic way they wrote songs, and that's what we're going to discover. Some of the stuff they'd prefer we didn't know. Others they've just chosen for personal reasons not to tell us. So the code will reveal a great deal about the Beatles that is not known. When it comes to analysing the Beatles, their music has been analysed since almost the day they started. At the end of their first year, there was a first analysis published in the Times of London, and it went into detail about their harmony, their invention, and how fresh they were compared to anyone in any genre of music at the time. And shortly after they broke up in '73, the first analysis of their whole musical career took place. It was Twilight of the Gods by Wilfred Mellers, and that's an amazing piece of work. And subsequently there have been other people having a go from a music theory point of view. Probably the finest is the one I refer to mostly, Walter Everett's The Beatles as Musicians, and also its sibling, which takes a lot of the ideas from that book, but looks at the Beatles in terms of musical progression rather than songs, and shows how essentially the Beatles reinvented or reinvigorated harmonic music. It's a tremendous book. However, in terms of lyrics, there's nothing analytical at all. Not one single book that analyzes the Beatles lyrics has been published. And that's what we're going to do. Now, before we move on, I'm going to just talk about the 3 books in the public domain that look at the Beatles lyrics. There are only 3. The first one is this one, Hunter Davies, The Beatles Lyrics. Hunter Davies was the Beatles' authorized biographer. He hung out with the group from the beginning of 1967 until about April '68 when the book was published. Actually just before they went to India, so February. And he has many wonderful anecdotes to talk about the Beatles from that period. The rest of the stuff is mainly stuff that's available generally, like what the Beatles said about their songs. He takes an impressionistic view of the Beatles. I don't think he provides any analysis at all. In fact, I'll just go to show you both the great value of his book and where it falls down. This is a draft lyric. This particular lyric is John Lennon's Strawberry Fields Forever. It's the lyric that has the most problematic in representation, in that there's 5 different versions in Wise publication alone of that lyric. That's how unstable the Beatles lyrics can be. And in the draft, John writes the correct lyric, which is not surprising. If you listen to it carefully, you'll find it matches the draft. However, in Hunter Davies' own copy of own transcription of the lyric, he ignores what's in the draft and he writes a different lyric. So that's Hunter Davies. It's a fine book, but you're not going to learn anything really new other than his personal interactions with the Beatles. A more impressive book is this book, A Hard Day's Right by Steve Turner. Now Steve really has taken a lot of time to research the Beatles, and he's tracked down everything the Beatles said about their songs and gone and has found artifacts such as photographs that are relevant to it. All the photographs in his book seem relevant to the Beatles. This is probably the most interesting one. He removed it from his subsequent editions, not surprisingly. He also changes his story as the Beatles change their story. So his second book has almost the same text, except this is it, the complete Beatles lyrics. It's much thicker, it actually has the lyrics, and the lyrics are by and large correct. So that's pretty impressive because almost nobody has correct Beatles lyrics. This is nearly correct and complete. And he's got some outstanding photographs, but when the Beatles change their story, he changed his story, so without even telling you that he's changed his story. So you see that from the first book to the second book. And that's pretty much part of the course with people who write about the Beatles, which means you don't really know what's going on, because why would the Beatles change their story in a major way? Why would someone not tell you that they've changed their story? Such is the nature of the problem we're dealing with. So that's the Beatles lyrics. Nobody really has, there's no established Beatles lyric. The finest one we have is in Steve Turner, but we still need to transcribe by ear to pick out the things that he gets wrong. Now we come to the topic of today, the Beatles secret code. This comes from the lead song in The Boys of Dungeon Lane. The song is called Days We Left Behind. It was the single released at the time the album came out. And it gives the album its title because he talks about Dungeon Lane in the song. So the comments I'm going to make about this, where I say Paul says, I'm referring to the interview Paul McCartney gave in May 2026 when he spoke to Apple TV for an hour about the song. He has placed that interview on his YouTube channel, so that's where you can find this. I'm a trained historian, and I find it's always wise to give your sources. None of these people give their sources, by the way, so you can't check them up and you don't know if it's based on an interview or where it's from. But historians need to know where you got your information from. So I've got it from here. So the song opens with the phrase, looking back at white and black, reminders of my past. Now, it doesn't take a genius to work out he's talking about his black and white photographs. He has confirmed that in that interview. So this album is in fact a looking back. Side one, you may think that the first song is not concerned with the Beatles. You would be wrong. Side one is concerned with the Beatles. Side two, the first one as well. And then it goes into family affairs. So it's very personal, looking back at the past with a focus on the Beatles, and certainly the music resurrects in a new context many of the most impressive musical techniques of the Beatles. So he is looking back, but not just in his photographs, but also in his mind. Smoky bars and cheap guitars, but nothing built to last is the second part of that first verse. And the only time that Paul McCartney ever played in smoky bars was in Hamburg when the Beatles were brand new. When as soon as they got their name, they went to Scotland and then they went to Hamburg, and in Hamburg they developed the great professionalism that powered them to the greatest celebrities of the 20th century. So it's not hard to see that this is the Beatles. The cheap guitars, Paul on his 14th birthday was given a trumpet by his father. He had just 1 month earlier, as we're going to find out in the very first song we analyse, 1 month earlier he had been overwhelmed by rock and roll music, and he wanted to replace that with a guitar. He got a cheap guitar. Then he goes, see the boys of Dungeon Lane along the Mersey shore, and he describes this in the interview. So first of all, Dungeon Lane. So Liverpool, the river, it comes, well, it's an estuary. There's the harbour, then there's stuff, then there's the city, then there's a whole lot of stuff, and then there's the airport around that bend. It's still an estuary, it isn't a river yet. And then behind the airport, on the far side of it, is a lane that goes to the river called Dungeon Lane. And across the main road that links the airport to the city is Speke, which is the suburb that Paul used to live in until his 13th year. And halfway through the 13th year, he moved with his family to Forthlin Road, where his mother died, and that was his last home in Liverpool. So when he talks about the boys of Dungeon Lane, he's talking about his journeys from his home across the main road down to the river, and he used to go there and just hang out, but he also loved watching birds, as we'll talk about later on in the song. Now, the boys of Dungeon Lane, he says he's thinking about two specific boys in this phrase. They were thugs, and they saw him alone in Dungeon Lane, and they threatened him with violence if he didn't give his watch to them. So he did that, and then after that he went to the police and told them what they'd done, and he recognized one of the boys' faces, and he told them, and the police recovered his watch for him. And so then he says, some of them will feel the pain, but some were meant for more. And in his interview he says that the some who will feel the pain is the boys. Well, they did feel the pain. I'm sure they got a walloping on the backside. In those days, that was what was done when you were caught doing something as naughty or evil as that. So they did feel the pain, but he says some were meant for more. And here we have a basic problem, and this is not an uncommon problem with Paul, because he says those are the boys, they'll feel the pain, and some were meant for more. That's me. Of course, he was meant for more. He was meant for true greatness. But if you think about it, this is one of Paul McCartney's most important albums as a solo artist. It's highly impressive. Coming out 1 month before he turned 84, it's almost unbelievable how creative and how energetic it is and how poetic it is. It's a man who's never stopped embracing life, and it's pretty much unthinkable that he would name this album, this really important album, after two thugs who he had one incident with once in Liverpool. So I look at it slightly differently, but this is just an interpretation. It's not right or wrong, it's just how I read it, but I'm an informed reader, and I think when he talks about some of them will feel the pain, but some were meant for more, this is the second part of the second verse. The second part of the first verse takes you specifically to the Beatles, smoky bars and cheap guitars, but nothing built to last. And I think that he's talking about the Beatles. And that would mean that those who were meant for more were John Lennon, Paul McCartney and George Harrison. An unbelievable more, a fame that was unimaginable. And who in that context would feel the pain? It would be the other two Beatles, Stuart Sutcliffe and Pete Best. And Stuart decided to leave the Beatles at the end of their 1961 Hamburg tour. He didn't go back with them to Liverpool. He stayed there with his girlfriend, Astrid Kircher, and tragically he started to suffer from major brain problems, and he died just before the Beatles returned to Hamburg in 1962. So he felt the pain, I guess, because they were just taking off. And the other person who really felt the pain was Pete Best. And he was a member of the Beatles from just before the trip to Hamburg. He joined, they needed a drummer to go to Hamburg, and they found him, and he became their drummer. And he was with them until August 1962. He attended and participated in the first EMI sessions that June. And in August, the Beatles decided to drop him when George Martin told their manager that he wouldn't be using him for recordings. And that has been a painful event. I think the Beatles handled it poorly, and they should have had Pete Best participate at least in the anthology, because his book on the period when he was a Beatle is highly informative and has no anger about the Beatles. Really, he was obviously a good friends with John Lennon. They rescued Stuart Sutcliffe from being beaten up at a famous concert that they had. He was very popular with the fans, but he wasn't suitable. He didn't have good enough technique to manage a recording session. So he would have been the one who felt the pain most. And I take this as a particularly kind line by Paul McCartney. He's never gone back and apologized or commiserated with Pete Best before, but I take this line as Paul reaching out to him and saying, in my old age, as I'm looking through our old photographs and stuff, yeah, You felt the pain, and we've always felt bad about that. Well, I'm letting you know now that we did. And so I think it's a kind gesture. I don't think it's anything else than that. But here's the crunch of the song. And what's so interesting is this is the most explored song in this hour-long interview that Paul gave. And the one thing we all want to know, the interviewer was not even permitted to ask him, so it's not even raised. We met at Forthlin Road and wrote a secret code never to be spoken. I stand by what I said. The promise that I made will never be broken. Now we know who the other person who met at Forthlin Road regularly. Forthlin Road was Paul's home in his mother's last year with them, and she died that Halloween, and John and Paul met in July of the next year, 57. John invited Paul to be in his group around the 4th of August 1957, and Paul took John from then on to his home, which was deserted. He just told his brother to stay away, and they worked through all the popular music of the time that they loved. They analysed it. Paul's father had taught him how to understand chords. They worked out how to play the chords on their guitar, and slowly built up their technique from first principles, just listening to things and working out how they worked, working how sequences worked and everything like that. They were self-taught musicians of an extraordinary musicality, and that's where they learned that. They also learned how to write songs. They wrote plays. They listened to The Goon Show and talked about all that sort of stuff. They dreamed about their career, about being bigger than Elvis, and that was the person at Forthlin Road. So when Paul says we met at Forthlin Road and wrote a secret code, he's talking about him and John Lennon, and it's there in the music. And we will see more about this in the third song we look at. Then he goes on to say, I stand by what I said, the promise that I made will never be broken. Well, he can't break it now because he can't ask John for permission because John is dead. And the other song will talk a bit more about that as well. The last verse, he goes and talks about, in the skies the skylarks rise above the sounds of war. Since that day I knew they'd stay with me forevermore. And this is Paul's love of bird life and watching the birds. And he had this book of British birds, an illustrated book that he would design for bird watchers, and he'd go to the river or go to the forests, and that was one of his favourite hobbies. And as he says, if you read his biographies, it's all his love of birds is there, and it's here again. And the interesting thing about that line is above the sounds of war. Now, Paul was born in June 42. Liverpool stopped hearing the sounds of war about 2 years later, except in the docks, of course. They were very busy with the warships and all the transshipment from the United States and Canada. So that would have been the sounds of war, the heavy work at the docklands. But until 1944, there were still bombers in the sky and rockets. And 44 in London was the time of the V2, but that didn't get as far as Liverpool. So he talks about that as a 2-year-old, and many people don't have a memory of their second year or their first year. I do. I can remember things going back to at least 6 months or earlier in my life, and I have strong memories of some things that happened when I was 1 year and 4 months. So I can relate to Paul on this because it's quite plausible that he remembers the soldiers marching up and down and things like that. So, and then he says, he closes with, because nothing stays the same and no one needs to cry. No one's left to blame for the days we left behind. And that is Pete Best again. You know, we weren't to blame. You're not to blame. It just didn't work out. George Martin didn't like you. It brought things to a head and we had to make a decision. And yeah, we had to leave these things behind. It's just how life is. I think it's a wonderful song, and it has that very interesting thing. We wrote a secret code. On the same album, he wrote a song that basically dangles in front of us, says, what are you going to do about it now that I've told you it exists? And the song's called Come Inside. It's another of these amazing songs musically. I've just been listening to David Bennett on YouTube do a wonderful analysis of this song. So if you wish to, by all means, a musical analysis, of course, it doesn't do lyrical analysis. So I'll read the song to you because it's quite provocative. You could read my mind if you wanted to. You could come inside. Got to let me know what you want to do. I don't want to hide. Step right in and take a look. See what you can find. All my life's an open book. Come inside my mind. Now, if his life's an open book, how can there be a secret code? So, we'll get to that too. Take it if you want it. You can have it right now. I can tell the truth if you want to hear. That is a most interesting line. I can tell the truth if you want to hear. In other words, I haven't told the truth yet. I haven't explained what we're about. I can tell the truth if you want to hear what I have to say. Not a single thing that you have to fear if you come my way. Now that is a slightly concerning line, because if you come my way suggests if you see things my way. But if you see things my way, then there's nothing to fear. Now I would say that most of the secret code is got much more to do with personalities and rivalry than it has to do with anything else. There are things in there that the Beatles would rather we didn't know, but that's a small percentage of what we'll find when we go through the secret code. We're just simply going to learn the Beatles so much more than you can ever learn elsewhere. And in fact, we're going to learn that there were two immense battles in the Beatles that have never been documented. So we'll learn more about the history of the Beatles through the code, through this private conversation in the public domain. So his last words are, open your mind, open your heart. Nothing else is keeping us apart. Well, if there's a secret code, that certainly is keeping us apart. So it's a tease, that song. What song in Paul's earlier catalogue talks about the secret code? It was towards the end of 1980, but it was before John Lennon was murdered. It was written to John. It addresses him in person without saying John, but it's you will see when we go through it. And because John died and Paul was so devastated by it, he couldn't record it until 1982. It became the lead song of his first album after John's death. It's called Tug of War. I'll read you the lyrics. The first verse describes their relationship, and it has one curious thing in it. It's a tug of war. What with one thing and another, it's a tug of war. We expected more, but with one thing and another, we were trying to outdo each other in a tug of war. And that's the nature of John Lennon and Paul McCartney. It was endless rivalry that fostered amazing creativity, as one was always trying to outdo the other. Literally, think of something new, a new twist, a new angle to take on it, never to repeat the same thing. Don't copy each other, obviously, although do learn from each other, but never acknowledge it. Like it's that kind of a game, which is the Beatles. It's the absolute core of their creativity. That verse describes it. And here's where he starts talking about the secret code. This is what he says. In another world, we could stand on top of the mountain with our flag unfurled. In a time to come, we will be dancing to the beat played on a different drum. So in the first part of that, we learn that the Beatles have yet to unfurl their flag. We still, to this very day, don't know what they stood for. What is their flag? And that's what we're going to do when we look at the Beatles' secret code. We're going to unfurl that flag. And the slightly ominous, just like Come Inside, slightly ominous second part, in a time to come we will be dancing to the beat played on a different drum, which suggests some sort of an agenda. And there are agendas in the Beatles, and some of them do have this characteristic. So that's his own words, it's not mine. But here he goes back to the relationship between him and John Lennon and the consequences if he reveals the secret code. This is what he says. It's a tug of war. Though I know I mustn't grumble, it's a tug of war. But I can't let go. If I do, you'll take this a tumble, and the whole thing is going to crumble. It's a tug of war. Pushing, pulling. In other words, you've got your side of the bargain, I've got mine. And even though then they were 10 years since they had been together, both of them has to hold on to that rope. One lets go and John's going to take a tumble and the whole thing is going to crumble. Those are strong words. And the last verse is the crux of it, where we learn a bit more about the secret code. We now know that it's reputational. In years to come, they may discover what the air we breathe and the life we lead are all about. But it won't be soon enough. No, it won't be soon enough for me. Paul is longing to tell us about the secret code. He can hardly bear to keep it silent. But of course, he said that to John then. It won't be soon enough for me. When they learn what we actually stood for, what the air we breathe and the life we lead are all about, when our flag's unfurled, but it won't be soon enough for me. So there is a secret code. These two songs make it clear, and we shall go into that as we gradually unravel the Beatles' lyrics. In closing, I'm going to answer a question which is important. How could there possibly be a secret code? The Beatles' lyrics are literally the most investigated, perused, thought about lyrics, probably in all of music. Their influence goes way beyond the Anglosphere. In their time, they were just as influential in the Philippines, as we know, Hong Kong. The journey to Hong Kong from London passed through 3 other areas. They were all Islamic countries, except for Bangkok in the end. And thousands of people rushed to the airport, to see the Beatles, to ask them to come out, to wave at them. I lived at the bottom of the world, literally, and they were immensely popular there. How's it possible that they could have a secret code? You know their lyrics. You could probably quote almost all of their lyrics if you're a Beatles fan today. If you know the Beatles' lyrics well, you would know that there are 3 songs that use ideas from John's favourite author, Lewis Carroll. You probably wouldn't know that there are also 3 songs that use ideas, 1 directly and 2 indirectly, from Edgar Allan Poe, another of their favourites, who appears, as does Lewis Carroll, on Sgt. Pepper's cover. Edgar Allan Poe, in his most famous short story, explained how it's possible to hide something that cannot be hidden, when you know that it's going to be searched for by everybody. And I guarantee you everyone's got their binoculars out now and then magnifying glasses to see the secret code, whether it's long in the distance over there, something complex and obtuse, or something that's staring right in front of you and it's just the little details that you've missed. Everyone's going to be thinking about that, because there it is now, black and white. We wrote a secret code. So the book, or short story, is the second of 3, built around a character called Auguste Dupin. He is the world's first armchair detective, and there is a case to be made for him being the first detective ever in fiction. In the first book, it's called The Murders at the Rue Morgue. If you know your John Lennon, you would know that in his last great interview, the one he gave to Playboy magazine between September and October 1980, shortly before he died, where he covered all the Beatles songs, there was an incident in the building and it sounded like a scream. He instantly brought to mind Rosemary's Baby and Murders at the Rue Morgue, which he actually said, another murder at the Rue Morgue. And so we know that Poe, even at his end, it was right there in the front of his mind. So the second book's called The Purloined Letter, and in it, it explains how you can hide a thing that cannot be hidden. Purloined means stolen. It's a fictional story built around the French monarchy. It sounds like it's Marie Antoinette, although the Queen isn't actually named, but it's a woman who's engaged in dubious activities that can be scandalous. And she's just received a letter. It's got, in those days, they didn't have envelopes. They rolled the letters up into a scroll, they tied a ribbon around it, and they stamped it with a wax seal that sealed the ribbon to the letter. And so you could tell whether the letter had been opened. And this was a red, big seal. She saw from the seal that it was a person that was going to give compromising information about her. And she was about to open it up when a minister walks into her room. And so she puts it underneath, in some distress, like I've just indicated, puts it on the table behind her. Another minister walks in. He's very good at reading the room, and he recognises straight away that she has a compromising letter. So he takes a letter out of his jacket, he pretends he's reading it, He gradually walks to the table, he pops it on the table, and he lifts up the other letter, and she watches the whole thing horrified, but she can't do anything about it because she'll be caught by the other guy. So the letter's gone. She contacts the chief of police, who's Monsieur G, and she asks that he retrieves the letter from the thief, Monsieur D. That's how they're known. And so he waylays Monsieur D 3 times by thugs, strip his clothes, check his walking stick, his hat, everything. The letter's definitely not on his person, but it therefore must be in his apartment because he has to be able to procure it at a notice. We know that he hasn't yet used it because things would have started to happen, but he has to be able to use it if the net starts closing in on him. So they start searching his place. Just before they do the search, the minister starts talking to Auguste Dupin, the first armchair detective, and he explains the situation to him and what he's going to do. And so he goes with his people every time the thief is out, goes to the place. They end up stripping up all the floorboards to see if it's hidden underneath it. They behind the wall panels, they take them off, and of course they check every book and the lining and everything in each book, all the desks and furniture for secret compartments, all the clothes. They go through the whole thing thoroughly, and more thoroughly than anyone could. Exactly how the world has approached the Beatles lyrics. Nothing, surely. The letter's not there. He comes back exasperated a month later, and he says to Dupin, he says, I'd pay 50,000 francs to anyone who could find the letter. And so Dupin says, just write the check out and you'll have your letter. He writes a check out and he literally takes the letter and gives it to him. And then he explains it to his sidekick, and this is the character, the Dr. Watson equivalent. He's the narrator of the story in this one. In the first one, he literally goes in and does all the groundwork, and the Dupin just works out the case from his armchair. But in the second one, he's just talking to him about what he did. He actually went to the thief's apartment, disguised as someone else, because he and them did not get on well. And he had a chat with him, and while he was talking, he worked out exactly where the letter was. He knew what he was looking for. He knew how it was, where it would be, and he found it, and he left his snuff box there so that next day he had a pretext for going back. So he goes back to retrieve his snuff box, and while he's there, there's a kerfuffle on the road outside, which he set up. But the thief is momentarily distracted to the window, and while he does it, he just exchanges a look-alike letter for the letter and goes home. And that's how he got it. And so, how did he do it? Well, he realized that if you can't hide something, don't hide it. Put it in the most obvious place. And what he did is he took the letter, he turned it inside out, he made it a bit dirty and scuffy on and then he put a black ribbon, not a red ribbon, and a little black seal on it, and he put it on a container which was hanging off right next to the mantelpiece. So it was one of the most obvious things in the room. This one letter hanging from a little box off the wall, and that's how he hid the letter. And this is exactly how the Beatles have hid their stuff. If you look in detail, think mathematical codes or something like that, you're missing the point. The Beatles weren't that kind of people. What we're going to see when we look at the Beatles secret code is we're going to see how it developed, accidentally almost. They worked out how to react to each other and build on an idea or challenge an idea and go on like that. And we'll see that in their very early songs even. We'll watch the thing emerge, and then we'll start seeing where it starts becoming powerful. So that's what our journey is going to be in the early songs of the Beatles. But before we do that, as I said, I'll explain to you how I got into the Beatles, how I started to become aware that there has to be something going on in their lyrics, and then what the secret code works. And I'll tell you that in the third of these introductory sessions, and you can then apply your own magnifying glass and see if you can start analyzing Beatles songs. If you like this session, please tick the like box, and also if you'd like to participate in more sessions, subscribe, and by all means drop me a comment. Thank you very much.